of this historic and truly historic occasion because Aubrey's going to take us back to the late 1920s and the early 1930s.
That's right.
And when I say that he draws enthusiasts, the minute we found out that Aubrey was going to be here through the good services of the Associated Press, Janice Megan having most to do with that from the Associated Press, and you will hear and see her more, I began to get emails from people across the country, and we are lucky enough that on their own recognizance have come the president, Jim Adkins, and the vice president, George Nixon, of the Morse Telegraph Club, and they are therefore can show the kind of exchange that Aubrey used to do back in the 30s, and we're very lucky to have them here. They brought equipment. Aubrey sent some. This is the Education Center. We hold 4 classes a day here for an in-depth study by students and teachers who want a little bit more than just the fun and education they get in the museum. We take them deeper into the nuts and bolts of journalism, into First Amendment, into ethics, into a crazy game called News Mania, which Leonard Hall right back there does and is the MC for. And so if you know students, if you know teachers, tell them to sign up. They should think about it if they're coming to the museum. I want to introduce Carol Knox, who has been the program initiator and in many cases the person who's putting on our program since we started in October. Carol Knox has had a long newspaper experience. She is came from, I know, Bergen Record and Philadelphia Inquirer, Detroit Free Press, I'm not sure whether I've named them all, but was most recently front page cover story editor and projects editor at USA Today until we were lucky enough to get her. So I'm going to let her get the program started. Thank you.
Thanks. It's great to see you here. It's great to see people who maybe have never worked with Morse code before here. It's so important in the history of journalism, just if I can say this as an aside. This just revolutionized journalism. This is why we write tightly in journalism. This led to what is called Milton style. So if you wonder why journalism is written the way it is, it's because of this little machine here. I am Carol Knox, and I'm the program developer here, and I'd also like you to meet Janice Megan from the Associated Press. She's Special Projects Manager in the AP Corporate Communications Department. She's worked in Portland, Maine, in Hartford, in Montgomery, Alabama, and in Atlanta for the AP. And she'll be also leading some of the discussion here today. Well, introducing this fella is a pretty tough task, but I'll just start by saying this. In 1917, a skinny 16-year-old from Goldthwaite, Texas, was hired by the Santa Fe Railroad as an apprentice operator. Now, this was a man's job, not a kid's job, but the men were at World War I. So he began doing a little bit of everything. He was selling train tickets and handling the bags and the Railway Express and slugging around all kinds of things. 2 years later, he was promoted as telegraph operator in the Santa Fe Message Relay Office at Temple, Texas. And then with 6 years of experience under his belt, in 1926, that young man was hired as press telegrapher for the AP at the new Lubbock, Texas Journal. That began a 41-year career with the Associated Press in telegraph, teletype, and wire photo. He saw a good chunk of the USA. He's been all through Texas and to New York and Los Angeles, Milwaukee, Kansas City. And in Des Moines, he met Alicia Ross, who happened to be an AP wire photo and teletype operator who became his wife. This was an AP family, something you'll see a lot. I'm in an AP family. My husband was AP. Mr. Keel is a remarkable man at 96. He is a repository of the stories of the golden age of telegraphy. It is an honor to present Mr. Aubrey Keel.
Thank you. Thank you.
The AP used the telegraph for 80 years. That's the way they sent the news. Is that right?
That's right.
And
over 80 years.
over 80 years.
From
And
1848 till the teletypes came in the early 30s.
That's right. And you had a tough job, right? You had to come in and work for 8 hours typing the copy that a telegraph operator was
They
sending to
usually
you.
handled about 15,000 to 17,000 words on an 8-hour tray.
Right. Now contrast that to 15,000 to 17,000 words during 8 hours. Now today, AP moves millions of words
Oh,
a day. They
absolutely.
move at more than 10,000 words per minute. So the
That
volume.
was high speed in those days, 40 to 45 words a minute.
Wow.
That is considered really high speed.
And can you now you had to be proficient in sending and receiving.
Right.
Is that correct?
Both
So,
sending and receiving.
can you explain?
Depending on where you worked and what the file was, a lot of places it was mostly outgoing file. Some of the places, if something happened there that was newsworthy, then the operator would send it to the bureau.
Can you explain for everybody a little bit exactly your average day when you came in to work, and you were working in Lubbock, Texas, right? And
That was
Dallas
my starting
your,
point.
And Dallas was the main bureau.
That is correct.
Can you tell us what your job was?
Well, in Dallas, mostly it was sending.
Mm-hmm.
Dallas being the state bureau would be a collection point for the stories coming in, then the wire editor would refile it back on what was called a state wire that served about 30 newspapers, as I recall. And I'd be sending all day. But at the outlying station, smaller newspapers would be primarily receiving all day long, unless the story developed there that was newsworthy enough to be sent back to the bureau.
Okay, and when you say you were receiving, that means you were typing the.
Maybe might you use, George is having difficulty hearing back there.
Okay.
It doesn't work? Okay.
Doesn't work?
All right.
Okay.
Just speak loudly, Aubrey.
Okay.
Got a megaphone?
So when you were receiving, you're typing those stories, and then what did you do with them?
Handed them to the wire editor, and he would sometimes cut them in length and use that portion of the story that he wanted to use. Or if it was not newsworthy in his area, he would just file it, spike it.
So sometimes you were typing stories that never got printed in that paper.
That is right, because they sent a lot more than some of the newspapers printed in those days. In a small daily, they didn't have need for all of that. But it was available to them if they wanted to use it.
And so you wouldn't be moving, how many stories a day?
Oh, I have no idea, because they varied in length and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have no idea how many numerically would be moved.
What
Moved
about-
as many as we could.
And what about breaking news, when you had
A breaking
breaking
story,
story.
a real hot story, we would send maybe a take at the outset, a bulletin or a flash, a small take of 5 lines or so, and then as the story developed, we would add to it as it developed. But we'd usually break into some story to send a bulletin, and then resume the story we were sending, and then come back to that story as the news developed.
That's what your transmitter had.
At the sending point, yes, wherever that may be.
And how about at the receiving point?
Well, the receiving points would all be receiving whatever was being sent, of course, and that wouldn't change. They would just change a piece of paper at their end and put a bulletin on a separate piece of paper and hand it to the editor immediately, so he would be aware of the story coming, that would be upcoming, more would be upcoming.
You worked right in the newsroom.
Yes, right in the editorial room. Sometimes we were in a room adjacent to the editorial room. In that case, we'd spike it, and they'd come in frequently. And if there was a bulletin, we would holler out, and they would come in and pick it up. But sometimes we were in a little room of our own. But usually, now in the bureau, we worked in a big room like this, with various wires coming in and various editors. Each wire operator across the desk, he had an editor who filed and received the messages and determined whether they should be forwarded or whatever.
what, when you send Morse code, you send dots and dashes.
Right.
Can you explain what those are, what those mean?
Beg your pardon?
What the dots and dashes mean?
Well, the dot is a short one. Dots, dashes are longer. That's dots, dashes.
And what do they mean, though? How do, when you're receiving, what do you listen for?
Well, letter A would be just a dot dash. B is C would be in Morse code, or on international would be, and D, N, different things. Well,
So you had to transcribe, you had to listen letter by letter and
yeah, but
write
you
the
get
word.
used to it, and you copy words instead of letters. Short words like and or the would be, you didn't go A-N-D, it was just A-N-D. The, it had a distinctive sound. Now if you got into a long word like exploration or something,
Right.
you had to pay attention that it's not expedition or explanation or something like that. But most words, you just automatically, I don't know how else to explain it. After you do it a while, it's just like music or something like that. It becomes automatic. Did you want to say something, Jim?
That's right, that's right. Can you tell us about Phillips code?
Phillips code was invented by an AP man, incidentally, 1879. I believe it was Walter Phillips, and it was invented primarily for the receiving operators. That was before typewriters. Receiving operators had difficulty keeping up with the sending operators, so this was developed to help them, and they, instead of writing the words out in full, we'll take the word CKT, circuit. That would be all that would be sent by the sending operator, and the receiving operator would just write CKT. But the editor would spell it out and send it back to the linotype operators, and he'd write them out. Like COP is Chief of Police, COT Cotton, COU is Country, and they shortened everything. It was an abbreviation of about 3,500 words, commonly used words, and through the use of that we could speed up telegraphy about 1/3. Went from 30 words to about 40 or 45 words with the same, but sending at the same speed. But the net production would be 40 or 45 words.
One of the most famous of these codes is COTUS, for President of the United States.
Right. But I'll tell you, that was seldom used. But it was there.
It was there.
It was there, but it wasn't, you didn't use it very often. I don't recall that it was used too many times.
We got a lot of publicity.
Yeah, publicity.
Is that where we get SCOTUS from? It's still
Right.
at the top.
Supreme Court of the
Anytime you get wire news on the Supreme Court, it says SCOTUS on the top, Supreme
Yeah.
Court of the United States.
Like PIPS, Philippines, and things like that. They shortened everything. And the receiving operator had a little advantage there because they could follow the context of the story and kind of fit a word in. If you were the sending operator, though, you had to know that code because you had to formulate the letters, and if you sent the wrong code, then the operator receiving end, hey, he sent the wrong thing. And really, it was more important for the sending operator to know these abbreviations. The receiving operator could sometimes guess a little bit, following the context of the story. I used to know most of them by heart, but I don't anymore. I haven't worked a wire in 64 years, so it makes a little difference.
Can you explain what the equipment that you have in front of you?
Well, this is what we started with, the key, just a hand key they called it, and we sent with a hand key. That is it. For the first 50 years or so, that's all they had was a hand key. And a lot of the operators developed a glass arm, and now they call it carpal tunnel syndrome. They hadn't invented that back then. It's like cholesterol. I don't think anybody knew what cholesterol was in those days. But
What's the difference from the other machines?
about 1900, Horace Martin came up with this invention, which is called he called it the lightning bug because it would make dots automatically. Instead of, this was a lot more work to do this all day long, whereas with this, you could just have it and make dots in a hurry. That came in about 1900 in that era, and that helped the sender tremendously. He could send all day long without fatigue on those. All he had to do was make the dashes that way and the dots that way.
So is that the kind of machine that you use at the AT&SF?
Yes. It was faster and easier. And these are used today in ham radio and a lot of other usages, a lot of it. They still make them. There were a lot of people that imitated it and made a lot of them over the years, but they didn't last. But this company is still in business and makes them.
If you wear an earphone with all this stuff going around and you're supposed to be listening to dots and dashes,
Yeah.
you never wore an earphone or anything to?
No.
Well, tell us about the sound. How that works.
There would be an operator here in a big office, an operator here and one there. Sometimes there was a little glass partition there, but you could still hear the other one, but there was a different sound. Every one of them you could change this thing and get a little different sound.
Show 'em how you change it,
Yeah,
you
can
know
you
what
turn it
that
around?
is?
He's living a can.
No Prince Albert can. And it enhanced the sound. Each operator would adjust it to his own, the way he wanted it. But you didn't pay much attention to the one over here. You just listened to this one. And that's the reason I have a little trouble hearing in my left ear. After listening to one of those 15 years, I think it impaired my hearing a bit. So if I say, huh? Well, you mean, that means I didn't hear what you said, asked.
So when did the telegraph was phased out when the teletype came?
In
And what's the
about the
difference?
30s, they started in the 20s, and they took state by state and phased out the telegraph. And a lot of the operators went their way, did other things. I know when they converted over in Texas, about 1928, I think, they let 30 operators go in one day, and some of them said, those teletypes won't work, they'll have us back in a week. It didn't work that way. They were long gone.
And the teletype how did the teletype work differently?
Well, the teletype worked mechanically with keyboards and a printing device at the other end. Teletypes were in for many years.
Like learning.
I didn't hear the question.
That being a telegrapher was like learning a new language or
It
learning
is
music.
another language, and on top of that, we have, so to speak, three languages. We have the continental or international code, which was used in Europe. Fact is, the American Morse was only used in United States and Canada, and in other areas, even on the telegraph, they used what was called a continental code, a different code in many respects. And the American Morse was strictly American. They didn't use it overseas. And on top of that, we have the Phillips code. So about three languages for communicating by telegraph or radio.
So if someone wanted to be a telegraph operator, they had to know all three
No,
before they get
it
hired?
depended on the service he was in. If he was in the radio service, he didn't have to know the American code, which was strictly landline. We call it landline. But a person doing telegraph in the United States or Canada used the American Morse, which was invented by Samuel Morse.
And then the Phillips code, if you were.
Phillips code is the abbreviation book.
Right.
Yeah. And the international code is the radio code. That mainly that's the difference in them.
What makes a good telegrapher?
Oh,
What would you look for? If you were hiring a telegrapher today, what would you look for?
well, usually, I don't know. I never did any hiring. I really don't know. But
Well, tell me what you told me what you called a guy who was a really good telegrapher. What did you call him?
a good telegrapher?
What did he
Well,
have?
I know what
Did he
we called a
have?
bad telegrapher, but I can't tell you what a good one.
You had to pass the wire test.
Right.
Your suspicion and your aura of reliability to report the thing on the ground.
A bad telegrapher was called a lot of things. One of the ones I can quote is lid. If he was called a lid, why that meant he was a poor telegrapher.
What did
Or-
you call the guys who were really fast?
No. Just sending or receiving. A good one that is sending, a good sender had a good fist. Yeah, had a real good fist. And there were degrees of sending. There were some operators that never could send well. They just had a poor fist, and they couldn't do it, and they sent combinations, what we call combinations. They'd run one character into the other, or things of that nature. But receiving operators were people who could copy most any sending operator, good or bad, and fast or slow. That would be a good receiving operator. But a sending excuse me, you want to say something? Go ahead. A good sending operator with a good fist was in demand, and not everybody could cut it, really. Jim wanted to add something there.
One thing about a telegrapher, most telegraphers could recognize another one by their fist. There were distinct characteristics that
Absolutely.
they had.
And if they worked together for a while, they'd know immediately when they changed operators.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just like a voice recognition or something of that nature.
How long would it take somebody to learn? Or does it take a week to learn this? Does it take a month or a year?
Well, it took me a year. Some people, I've heard of people learning it more rapidly than that, faster than that, but it took me about a year to become proficient, and I wasn't really a first-class operator then. It takes years sometimes to develop a first-class operator that can copy anybody, any speed. And not much demand for them nowadays, so you don't have anybody coming up.
You're taking what they're sending, and if they start going through the Phillips and all, and you're not quite up to it, there's no way for you to say slow down or repeat that?
Yeah, you can, but they didn't like it. We called it breaking. If you,
Breaking.
yeah, we'd break and say, go ahead, whatever the last word was. But on the AP, they frowned on that. If you were hired by the AP, you were supposed to be able to copy most anything at any speed, and if you couldn't, why, you didn't last very long.
And just so your kind of working conditions, I see a green eye shade back there. Now, did you guys wear green eye shades and chew tobacco?
I never
what was
did,
your
but a
life
lot of
like?
operators did.
Yeah.
On the railroads in particular, the station agents who were combination agents and telegrapher and everything, they wore the eye shade, and they wore sleeve protectors, a black, if they wore a white shirt, they get dirty, you know, so they wore black with elastic, I think. Maybe you, did you ever wear those?
I never did, but I worked with some that did, and,
Yeah.
and true, it was to protect their white shirt from dirt on the table.
But are you in there smoking and having a cup of coffee and trying to do all this and listen all at the same time?
Well, they can do it. They can take a drink of their coffee and
Catch up on the typewriter.
Normally, one thing I'd like to point out too, that a receiving telegrapher would usually copy behind. They weren't copying right on top of what the sending operator was saying. So you may be a word or two, or
Three or
maybe even
four.
more behind.
Yeah, good operators could copy several words behind, depending on his abilities and depending sometimes on the sending operator of whether or not required strict concentration to follow the sending operator. If he's a good operator, why, it is kind of a breeze to just sit there and copy on a typewriter. I
You
never.
didn't call it a typewriter, did you?
Typewriters came into general use about 1890.
You got a word for them, though, didn't you?
Oh, mill. Yeah, on the mill. We didn't call them typewriters. That is a mill, and you copied on the mill. And I used a Royal a great deal of the time. Western Union used all cap Underwoods. I hated the darn things, but that's what they used. I never did like an Underwood, and I didn't like Remington. I liked L.C. Smith, and Royals were good telegraphers' machines to copy with. They were real neat. L.C. Smith was good, quiet typewriter. QSP, please.
The biggest
What's
story.
the biggest story that you've ever received or sent?
I have no idea. My gosh, so many every day. It's hard to say the biggest story. One of the big ones at the time was the Lindbergh kidnapping and the Hindenburg explosion. I was in New York when that happened, and those are two that come to mind. Lindbergh story, you know, hung on for a long time, like the O.J. Simpson and all of those. It went on for years. And the Hindenburg was an awfully big story at the time, that explosion. Photographically, it was big too. We got some beautiful pictures of that.
You might also mention about telegrapher sporting events like prize fights and baseball and stuff like that.
Oh, yes. We had play-by-play baseball broadcast and prize fights, championship fights. Would have ringside telegrapher that would be sending blow by blow. They couldn't send, of course, as fast as the blow, but you followed the fight pretty well.
When they were reporters too at the fight, the guy setting it up with the reporter saying it's the left.
reporter would be telling the telegrapher what to send, and he sent whatever the reporter. And baseball the same way. They had a reporter telling him what to send.
What other sort of events did they do that? What other sort of events did they do that in which the reporter, they had a telegrapher at a news event?
Well, some of them, racetrack results would be one thing, and championship prize fights, baseball, particularly World Series, and of course after football and all of those came through, telegraphy had gone. And play-by-play was real popular way back. Even some of the newspapers would put the telegraph operator near a window where a crowd could assemble out there, and they could tell them what was going on.
Outside the newspaper office?
Outside the newspaper office, in the little places, not, of course, big newspapers. They followed the fights and play-by-play. They had a lot of fans that way. I never participated. I never worked at a place where they did that, but I know it did happen.
Do you want to do a demonstration now of,
Well, I can send a little story here, or
story, or if somebody would like to,
or someone.
sentence to send between the keys and the dash there?
If you want to give me a little message, I'll send it to Chicago over in the corner there.
Or you have the stories that I gave you to send to
Yes,
these,
I have a bunch of them here. George, you want a copy of the story? Okay, I'll send you one about just a minute here. I'll pick out one. Here it is.
How about that one?
Oh,
Is that too fine for you?
no. This will be a little poem if you're ready over there, George. got some dirty contacts here, George. I apologize. These contacts are a little bit dirty. Okay. I'm going to send you a story, a breaking story, George, and let you copy that. That would be easier to do.
When George broke, though, he opened the key and Aubrey couldn't send anymore. So that's how he knew.
Yeah. He broke because I sent bad. George is an expert receiver, so it wasn't his fault that he broke. And this Vibroflex is giving me a little trouble here. Okay, here's a story, George. That's what we listen to all day long.
Okay.
I don't think you got much out of it, but that.
Do you want to read back what?
I'll try to.
Okay.
You're not telling me you're going to send international Morse that time.
I started to copy
Well, I'm
it too,
going-
and I couldn't.
Atlanta AT. Cubans joyously welcome returning exiles and state radio news media heralded the polling us in the last hours before post-on poll and something I missed there. Arrived today for the historic visit to the land of blank Fidel Castro. It's on radio and believers cause Cuban believers and non-believers to line the parade route from the airport. That's all. Signed, Keel.
Operator, you could,
When was the last time you used it?
64 years ago.
And you should remember.
Sure. It's like riding a bicycle. You get rusty at it, but you and you can't send as well. I used to be able to send without falling down. We call it falling down when you stumbled. If you tried to make a character and failed to make it properly, why you fell down. But a good operator, we could send practically all day long and not fall down. We were used to it. It was automatic, just like playing the piano or anything. Once you do that a long time, why, it comes automatically.
You asked the last time you used it. Well, on the landline, yes, but there was a group of us on ham radio, and we talked on radio codes there every day at 8 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock at night. We had a group together at 6 o'clock on the ham radio band, and we talked on codes a little visit every day.
Yeah, George participates in that more than I do. I'm on there, but I don't usually send much. I listen more than I send.
We await Keel's daily arrival to give us the latest word from him.
Yeah, I give them the weather report from Kansas City and things of that nature, and then I listen mostly, because maybe I'm busy with the email trying to do something else. Boy, that email, you get addicted. That takes a lot of time. It's fun, though.
Tell us about your equipment at home.
I've got 2 computers. I've got a Gateway 2000. That's my frontline computer, and then I've got a fallback 486 with Windows 3.11 in it, and I've got 95 on the good one. Then I have all my radio gear, and it's all in one little place where I can turn around and do one or the other. I've got a digital camera, flatbed scanner, the whole works.
Aubrey, what happened to all these telegraphers? What jobs did they do once telegraphs were phased out?
I don't understand the question.
Yeah, where'd the AP telegraphers go when they left AP service, the ones that did leave?
Or did some of them stay in the AT&T?
Where did they go?
Yeah, what'd they go on to do?
I don't know. You mean way
What
back?
other sort of telegraphers were there? What other
Oh,
than
a lot of
telegraphers?
others.
A lot of them became railroad operators,
And Western Union and Postal and
brokerage.
oil line pumping stations. There were many of them, and other services. In those days, telegraphy being the main means of communicating with distant points, a lot of corporations had their own setup, their own operators and lines. It was a big thing. I mean, that was the only way of communicating back in the 20s. The teletypes were just coming in.
Aubrey may be too modest
No, I'm
to
not.
tell you. But the press telegraphers were among the very top guns of the telegraphy.
If you became a press telegrapher, you had it made. Yeah.
They were red hot operators.
But there were a lot of hot operators at Western Union called bonus operators, who could take messages faster than the ordinary operator, and they were paid a bonus because they worked a hot wire. And they'd have a hot sender at one end and a hot receiver at the other, and they could move a lot of messages. How much did I make? Oh boy.
What was your starting salary?
The first job I had with AP, $32.60 a week, 48 hours,
That's a 6-day week.
6-day week, $32.60. I don't think you can live on that today. Not very long. But that was an increase over the railroad salary, which was about $25 a week. And that's the way it was. Back in those days, that was money. We lived on it, bought automobiles and everything. Yeah.
Aubrey, Carol asked you when we were on the phone together about the fact that when she was at the Philadelphia Inquirer, she heard that the telegraphers were hard drinking, hard driving,
What?
guys, and you told a little story on yourself in your letter. Are you willing to tell that again?
Oh, I guess so.
Good.
I worked at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and there were 2 other services in there, Consolidated Press and another one. And those were older men, good telegraphers, and they had a habit of going out and drinking their lunch. Well, I was a young kid, and I thought, hey, be a big boy, I'll go out with them. It was Prohibition days, they went to a place where they could get a bottle of home brew for lunch. I went over one day and I drank a bottle of home brew with them. I came back and the wire started up. I could hear them, and I knew, but I couldn't get it down. That ended my drinking career right quick, I'll tell you. You know, some of those old-time telegraphers, they could be kind of mellow and work all day, but I couldn't do it. It wasn't for me, and I learned in a hurry. You never saw a man sober up as fast as I did. Oh, man. I don't know how I got by with that story. I remember it was a bulletin, and I must have patched it up some way and got by, but never again. No more drinking on the job. That cured me.
Are there any mistakes or words that you that were lost in communication that turned out to be a glaring error or something like that?
Well, you want to know if there were any mistakes or errors that turned out to be a real bad thing.
I don't recall any. I know there have been some. There must have been. But I don't recall anything. Now, believe it or not, we copied the New York stock quotations. After the market closed, that was one of our duties at the larger papers, copy all of those figures and fractions. That's high, low, close, and change. And that took about an hour or two. Today, see, in those days, they didn't have as many stocks on the market, and not all of them were traded. But today, with all the volume, millions of shares and transactions, to copy the complete stock report, all of the quotations and fractions, high, low, close, and change, would take hours to do that. Now I guess they send it out in a matter of minutes, don't they? The stock quotations. And but in those days we copied by hand all of those stocks. We had 52 books, a stack of books beginning with A, B, Abbott, and Briggs, and on down till, and we got a 6-month supply of those. We called them books, and we used one page off of each one each day. It was quite a job, and there's where you had to be careful about those figures, because a lot of people following the market, they read the paper. Hey, they were in the brokerage office that day, and it didn't close at that figure. Mistake, you heard about it right away. One thing the AP was particular about was names and figures. You needed to be correct on that. Names and figures. And otherwise, you sometimes get by with something, but not on names. Everybody wants his name spelled right.
Aubrey, are you familiar with that overhead story about the headline in the newspaper, Will Overhead?
Yeah, that is a good story.
Is that on the Telegraph? Or was that later with the Telegraph?
I think that is later than Telegraph, and that was an error in a misunderstanding in the meaning of the message. Yeah, Overland will overhead results or something. What was that? How did it go?
Overhead was a nickname for a way of communicating direct point to point, whether it be on the phone, or telegraph, or teletype, some information. And the Indy 500, and they, I forget the use of it.
Well, overhead meant not say the AP office is closed for the night to a newspaper, but a story developed, and they'd overhead it by Western Union, and they called it overhead when it was sent not on an AP circuit but on a postal or Western Union. And there was some mix-up, some way they wanted the results of the Indianapolis 500 race, and somebody said Will Overhead, and so they came out with the headlines, Will Overhead won the race. That wasn't what it was meant at all. I recall it was something like that, but Will Overhead, and Will Overhead, there may be one around somewhere, but he didn't win the race. I don't know. That wasn't a telegraphic error. It was an error in interpreting a message.
Any other questions?
When you send out a message, how many places does that one message go? You only go to one place?
Well, in Texas, on a wire I worked out of Dallas, there were about 30 newspapers that were receiving. And it depended on which state, which circuit you were on.
There was no way to like direct your message to like one specific place?
Well, Dallas was what we call the state bureau, the collection point, and we sent out to all of the little newspapers from there.
You remember covering the stock market crash in '29?
Do I remember it? We were for hours. It was dark before we finished that evening. That was a real long one, and yes, I remember that quite well.
So did the armed forces use this communication system?
Oh
Did
yeah,
they
even in
train-
World War II they used it a lot.
Did they train people in the same way you were trained?
I suppose so. They have the Signal Corps, and I think they have classes. They train people in the Signal Corps. I wasn't into that phase of it. I was in the Army Air Corps for a short while, but they put me in public relations in a photographic section when I should have. They did just the Army way, misclassify you. If you're a mechanic, where they make a doctor or something out of you, I don't know.
It was used in the Civil War too.
Well, Civil War, young kids were telegraphers back then. 12, 15, 18 years of age, and the Union forces had about 1,200 of them. And when the war ended, why, some of those, Andrew Carnegie was a terrific telegrapher, and Thomas Edison was a good operator, and Sears of Sears and Roebuck was a good operator, and the one who set the world record was a man, Ted, I call him McElroy, but he pronounced it McElroy. Ted McElroy copied at 75 words a minute for 5 minutes, but he made 3 errors, and I don't think the AP would stand for that. He made 3 errors, but that was at high speed. I can't even copy. I can do about 50 words, and that's about the limit for me, but he was a world champion typist, so he didn't have to think about typing it. I have to think about typing and listening too, but he had only one problem. He had to listen to it, and that was all. He put it down. He could do 100 words a minute, so it didn't bother him. And the 75 words is just a blur. Believe me, it's just a blur. I've listened to a tape, and it took me a few minutes to adjust to the speed. At first you think, hey, they can't be sending Morse, but they are.
We have time for one more question. If anybody- Okay. You know everything about this.
As a matter of fact, we're only about half a mile from where some of those first signals were sent up here at Fort Myers. That was the center of the Army Signal Corps there back in the 1840s, I believe.
Morse demonstrated Morse successfully in 1842, I believe. In 1848, the AP was using it, but they used commercial wires till about 1880. They used Western Union to file the news dispatches. Then the AP
Released online.
they organized their own wire service and so forth. And from then on, they hired operators. At one time, when I went on, they had 1,500 operators, and only 4 of us left out of the 1,500.
Well, we thank everybody for coming. In fact, we have a small intro for you, your attendance here today. And we thank especially the Associated Press. Because without them, first of all, Aubrey wouldn't have had a job, and without them, we wouldn't have 150 years of really the finest news in the world. So thank you all so much. Thank you.
Well,
This is the text as I copied it from Mr. Keel's transmission. Havana, AP, period. Cubans joyously welcomed returning exiles, and state radio news media heralded His Holiness in the last hours before Pope John Paul and something arrived today for the historic visit to the land of Fidel Castro. State-run radio blank Cubans believers and non-believers to line the parade route to the airport. And Keel said, that's all from Keel.